Hello and welcome to the changing face of e-commerce. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Des Blanchfield and I have the pleasure of being your host and moderator for today's discussion on the changing face of e-commerce. We're very excited to be hosting this exclusive live stream panel presented by Supply Chain Insights digital magazine. Supply Chain Insights is a new supply chain technology digital magazine for Australian and wider Asia Pacific enterprises that looks behind the scenes and examines innovative technology and the processes that make supply chains revolutionary. In this panel discussion today, we're going to be covering everything from fulfillment locations to hardware requirements, all the way through to software and infrastructure. We invite our attendees today to participate with questions through the chat feature through the entire hour. The overall structure of this is that I'll be giving you a very brief sort of market positioning update around some of the things we've seen of late in the last 1 or 2 years and how we got to where we are now. We will then be going to a discussion panel with our panelists today, which we'll introduce in a moment, and then we'll wrap up with the Q&A section. But again, thank you very much for joining us, and please do post your questions through the hour. If we can, we will weave them into the conversation through the panel discussion, but otherwise we'll get to them in the Q&A. So before we kick off, let me introduce our amazing expert panel for today's discussion. Today I'm joined by Travis Erridge, who's the co-founder and CEO of TMX. Travis, great to have you here. Thanks so much for making time to join us.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Chris Buckthorpe. Chris is the Director of Professional Services at Manhattan Associates. Chris, great to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
We're also joined by Royston Hua, who's the Vertical Practice Lead for Asia-Pac Supply Chain at Zebra. Great to see you, Royston. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Des. Pleasure to be here.
We're also joined by Matthew Heap. Matthew is the Head of Solution Architecture for APJ at Rackspace. Great to see you, Matthew. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here. Looking forward to it.
So before we dive into our panel discussion, I thought I'd just give us a starting view of the world, where we are today and how we got here. I think that there's no secret that we've had an enormous number of significant impacts in our personal lives and our professional lives, and certainly the world of retail and e-commerce has been turned upside down, necessarily so. So I thought I would just highlight a few key things that will help set the stage for today's conversation. I think it's fair to say that before 2020, the topics of supply chain and logistics and the relevant challenges that businesses faced in ensuring that their goods and services got to their customers in various ways were really only conversations that people in this broad industry space were having, or often considered as things they might do in the future. And there was obviously continuous development and work being done in there, but it wasn't necessarily one of the key imperatives. It was something that continually improved over time, it may not have been one of the top 3 things that their organization was investing in, even if they were primary retail focused organizations. In some cases, it was often seen, in my experience, as an evil necessity as opposed to a business strength. But I think, as we all know, all of a sudden these conversations were front and center. They went from the 4 walls of the warehouse to the boardroom in a blink of an eye. One of the biggest areas that businesses have seen need to be transformed is that, of course, of e-commerce. And in Australia, where most of our panelists are based, according to a recent Australia Post report, online shopping growth topped out at around 57% year on year. In 2020, more than 1 million additional households shopped online every month in comparison to the previous year in 2019. In fact, more than 1.3 million households bought something online for the first time in the year 2020 through the pandemic experience, predominantly out of pure necessity with the lockdowns in place. But once those lockdowns eased, more than half these people continued to shop online. I know myself, I've been through the process of supporting our local retailers, particularly my local cafe, where I would normally just rock on up and stand in there and take my turn to demand my cappuccino and a tasty pastry of some form. Overnight, they were forced to go down the e-commerce route, and they got access to an app. They got e-commerce capabilities. I used the app to order my coffee, waddle up the street. They pinged me when my order was ready, and I was handed it through a nice big sliding window. I asked them recently how that impacted their business, and they said it almost tripled their business because people found it more convenient to do that rather than just randomly walking up and having to stand around, which was a phenomenal outcome for them. So the question we're really asking ourselves now is, what does this all mean? As we led up to the end of 2019, a number of organizations had very big programs of work to look at digital transformation to cloud environments, adopting SaaS tools of various forms. We've certainly seen that with Office 365 that essentially forced us to go to a SaaS model. In the world of supply chain, transport, logistics, aviation, so forth, that was a fairly slow-moving monster. So, we've seen the lead up to 2019. 2020 obviously turned that whole thing upside down, and through necessity, some immediate changes were made. And I know a number of our panelists today will give us some great insights into how they help their customers and organizations and their ecosystems address that. And I guess that's really what we're here to talk about today, as to, kind of what happened to the world of e-commerce and what kind of growth everyone had witnessed and how they responded to that and some of the immediate impacts that the pandemic brought about. And more importantly, where we're going to go from here, what some of those changes actually mean. As we know, we've all gone to that online shopping model through necessity, but now we've become very used to it, and it's a convenience. We saw the lead up to the pre-pandemic with things like, digital natives, always connected, mobile first, everyone looking for that consumer experience that became a celebrity consumer experience. I was guilty of that myself. I would predominantly shop with people who made me feel great as opposed to just convenience. The pandemic created a bunch of necessity of change and technology and adoption of e-commerce. So I guess really what we want to talk about today is where do we go from here? What can organizations learn from the lead up to and the duration of the pandemic? What can we leverage from those learnings? And how can some of our panelists and their organizations lead us to a better and stronger place? And what that might mean across our economies, through our businesses and our society, and again, how organizations can leverage that and turn that into opportunities for success for their organizations, either commercially or technically or operationally. So let me bring back our panelists and just briefly introduce them and have them give a little summary of themselves and their role, their remit, and their organizations. Travis, I wonder if I could start with you. You're the co-founder and CEO of TMX. I wonder if you could maybe just give us a quick introduction to yourself and your role and remit, and a brief outline of TMX and the organization.
No problem at all, and thank you. So Travis Harry, CEO and co-founder of TMX. We started the first part of TMX back in 2010, really off the back of the GFC, and subsequently since then have been leading in APAC of all things consulting services around supply chain, right the way from source to shelf, designing networks, freight assessments, DC design, implementing change along that journey. But we've seen a rapid change, as we talked about, up until 2019 in terms of automating processes and seeing, supply chain going from this back of house, dirty old shed out the back to becoming the one of the key elements that a retailer has to survive in a very strong and growing market. And obviously in the last few years, we've seen this rise of e-com, but obviously through the pandemic and post the pandemic, we've seen it scale and grow. So we've got 150 professionals across 8 countries around Asia Pacific, and work with some of the biggest ASX listed companies all the way through to multinational businesses. So that's us.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting some of those insights, particularly around what's happening in the warehouse environments that you're rolling out, either refit or new sites. We're also joined by Chris Buckthorpe. Chris is the Director of Professional Services at Manhattan Associates. Chris, great to have you here. I wonder if you could give us a brief introduction yourself and your role and remit and Manhattan Associates.
Yeah, sure thing, Des. Thanks for that. Now, as you've already said, I run the Professional Services Consulting Division for ANZ for Manhattan Associates. Manhattan, if maybe you're not aware, is a global leader in the development of, call it, supply chain execution and omnichannel software. Our traditional space, and we're recognized as a global leader across warehouse management, transportation management, and we run some of the largest, most sophisticated kind of DC operations and fulfillment operations around the world. We've been here in Australia for some 20 odd years now, and have very established practice with local consulting capability on the ground here. Manhattan over the last probably 5 to 10 years has seen a significant shift in call it the demands and the development of our technology into the omnichannel space. So you'll now start to see a lot more of the Manhattan name linked with kind of omnichannel solutions around order management, call it customer care and the capabilities which drive call it the efficiencies, of call it, network inventory and things like that moving forward.
Fantastic, thank you. And we look forward to learning a bit more about the emergence of software as a service, cloud-based capabilities that you're bringing to the market.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Thanks.
We're also joined by Royston Hua, who is the vertical practice lead for APAC supply chain at Zebra. Royston, thanks so much for joining us. I wonder if you could give us a brief introduction to yourself, your role and remit, and Zebra.
Oh, thanks a lot, and good morning to everybody as well. So my name is Royston, or Roy for short. And I have been in the supply chain solutions industry for about 2 decades, right? Working with global 3PLs in the APAC region, and in various roles from operations management, solutions design, implementation, with various industry verticals, right? So as a vertical practice lead, or VPL for short, specializing in supply chain operations in Zebra Technologies, I collaborate actually internally and with customers to identify opportunities for our customers to digitize and modernize their operations, from source to destination with Zebra offerings, as we are a global leader in enterprise edge computing and mobility computing software since 1961. So, and this is actually helping our customers to sense, analyze, and act for positive outcomes at the edge of the enterprise, right? So it's all frontline operations that requires digitized data capture and analysis. Yeah, that's
fantastic.
In a nutshell.
Really looking forward to getting some of your insights, particularly around the transition from legacy environments to the sort of the brave new world of, as you said, edge networking, edge computing, and potentially the mobility piece of it. We're also joined by Matthew Heap. Matthew is the head of solution architecture at APJ at Rackspace. Matthew, great to have you here. I wonder if you could likewise do a brief introduction of yourself and your role and remit, and Rackspace, the company.
Thanks, Des. So yeah, Rackspace Technologies. I've been the head of solution architecture here for about 8 years now. Really being focused on letting customers understand what multi-cloud really means, or hybrid cloud. Being able to bring expertise to customers so that they actually can bring modern solutions to market. We do have a lot of SMEs in the supply chain space on this call. We're the glue that connects both the supply chain and the rest of the business together, both with their consumers and with their upstream and downstream providers. And a big place is where we add talent to customers to allow them to actually go and execute that. Australia's a very mature market, and we have a high demand of skills in the market, and we provide that to our customers across the technology space.
Fantastic indeed. There's no secret that Australia is globally renowned as an early adopter of technology and new business processes. So looking forward to learning a bit more about that, and also the insights you can probably share around the transition from on-premises through to third-party data center hosted, and now obviously into the cloud in either infrastructure as a service or software as a service offerings. Well, let's jump straight in here. I wanted to start out with some of the business challenges first, and then we'll lead into the technology challenges and then look at the operational challenges. Travis, I wonder if I could maybe bring you in first here. I mean, we've touched on this briefly, but I wonder if you can share some insights around what you've seen of late, sort of pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and some of the thoughts you've got coming out of the pandemic period, and some of the big shifts in consumer behavior and some of the immediate urgency required by organizations to be able to adopt new technologies to provide e-commerce capabilities, and to either refit and re-engineer their backends from warehouse through to fulfillment and distribution and supply, or fit out new environments, and some of the highlights you've seen over the last sort of 12 to 14 months.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we'll start with the pre-pandemic component, and I think we spent a lot of time over that journey really looking at the total cost of supply chain and trying to lean out elements of supply chain to make it faster, more effective, more cost effective. And I think there'd been this rising e-commerce component to each of those business cases over the last 3 to 4 years. But in the last 2 years, up until the pandemic, it was a common question when we were presenting was really, how big is our e-commerce offering going to be? How are we fulfilling those orders? How big is our omni-channel? And we would basically get to the end of it and then just be sensitivity analysis. What happened during obviously a year and a bit ago, then put everything on its head, and every business case that we were doing during that time got affected almost immediately. So we saw this changing consumer behavior. We saw these random buying patterns that started to play out. We saw people that were not ready, that were in denial for what was coming. There was people that had designed supply chains so lean that their lead times were too long and they didn't have inventory in the right places, right locations. We saw winners and losers through that process pretty significantly. We saw some of the biggest brands in Australia not be able to actually sell product because they didn't have an online offering, and we saw that throughout the region. So, you know, it was a significant change, and I think there's reports that talk around 5 to 10 years of development in that space, in the space of sort of 6 to 9 months of processing, and I really do believe that that's what's happened. And it changed segment to segment, but we've seen every business now looking for agile solutions to how they, so post-pandemic, if you like, or coming out the other side. And I know in Asia at the moment, there's some rising pandemic cases again that are happening, but we're seeing people trying to look towards the future and predict what they're going to see, and they're all looking at agile solutions in terms of that, and digitizing their supply chains. Pretty simple, so that they can use real-time analytics to determine what that looks like. They're being more cautious with fixed automation and what they look to put in, and looking more towards mobile automation where possible, where they can scale and grow it. We're seeing, you know, all these lessons learned around stock cover and not over engineering or under engineering into the future. And you know, the common discussion is what happens when we have another black swan event. How do we handle that? How do we go through that? We've seen people really start to look at their networks on omni-channel and how they fulfill each of those channels pretty significantly. Has been a big change. But I would say that the rise of the e-commerce component, or the person in charge of e-commerce, has now become a very key person in all of those businesses, and across Asia Pacific. Some of those businesses were just not ready for it. I mean, in certain parts of Asia, people don't have bank accounts. So how do you pay for that e-commerce order? Is it cash? And we've just started that part to our business, which started pre the pandemic, which you delivered. And that's a real issue for a lot of brands and clients through Southeast Asia at the moment. So yeah, it's been the biggest change that I've seen, and I've been in it for a bit over 20 years, playing in this space. It's certainly been the biggest change. The big question is, what does the next 10 years look like, and what's the trend mapping? And I don't think anyone can clearly define what that is, but it certainly is different to pre the pandemic.
Indeed, no, some great points there, and I'd like to touch on a few of the things you said there a little later on in the technology segment. But Chris, I wonder if I could bring you in here. I mean, you've got your finger on the pulse from a whole range of these spaces, particularly the focus on professional services that you work around. I wonder if you could share some of your thoughts around some of the business impacts and some of the, I guess, the responses that you've had to support customers go through to address the big shift to not only just adopting and implementing e-commerce, but some of the end-to-end journey that Travis was just talking about there, that's had to get smarter, more lean, more agile, and I guess more digital.
Yeah, sure thing, Des. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think I just absolutely echo a lot of the same kind of things that Travis has seen, through the market. Kind of call it pre-pandemic. A lot of the focus that we've seen, talk about these concepts of the digital supply chain transformation. In my mind, that being more, call it a consumer-driven, response to, the way technology changes the way they interact with business. And in its own, that's obviously driven a significant change in, kind of the way that, organizations have need to operate and engage. And Australia is kind of, as an example, has been a little bit kind of, off the pace to what's happened in other parts of the world. So, I think that kind of, the stuff that Travis was talking about, when obviously the pandemic came along, a lot of organizations were kind of caught a little bit unawares, right? That traditional supply chain structure, while it was, it's been, efficient for the last 15 to 20 years, is kind of now a little bit stretched in terms of, engaging with a new, call it consumer and retail reality, right? So that whole kind of question about, what are the kind of business challenges around e-commerce? It's kind of a loaded question because there's a million and one different areas in which that impacts. But if I just focus in on a couple of key areas that Manhattan's been helping our customers with over the last, call it 12 months or so, and where a lot of the attention is at the moment, and where we see the market kind of going in the future. So obviously this disruption, has caused a shift in obviously, customer engagement, the intent to want to buy online, and that immediacy and the level of satisfaction we're looking at. So that's a key driving force. So that consumer behavior going forward, I think, is going to be a lot stronger, needs to be a lot more responsive, but also needs to be a lot more consistent, across now an extended network, as businesses respond to how they deal with the customer. And then obviously we've got this physical disruption of the supply chain. So, all of a sudden you're not allowed to work in the DC, or the customers can't enter your store, or you've got, gridlock in the transportation networks. How do you actually, kind of respond and accommodate and actually meet, still a consumer demand from them? So from a Manhattan point of view, there's a couple of key things. This whole concept of, call it the omni-channel network, and how you manage that concept of network inventory and being able to connect different services across different media. Do I fulfill out of DC? Can I do the same thing out of store? If I've got someone who kind of buys online, return in store, things like that. So responsiveness to new ways of engaging, and being able to provide that flexibility and to be able to flick a switch and turn on a new capability pretty quickly has been pretty key. Backing that up is obviously this consistency across service levels. So how do we enable, faster delivery and different capabilities across, call it DCs and stores, especially with this increase in volume, right? So it's put a lot of pressure on what's been traditional kind of DC and store operations. So what are new practices? What's happening around the world? Are there better ways to do it? How do we drive that efficiency? So plenty of conversation around that. And then obviously, the whole conversation about, how do we bring in or upgrade new capabilities, right? Volumes, costs, positioning of inventory, is an interesting discussion at the moment, right? So as you got this new volume, faster delivery to customer is key. The traditional models of centralized inventory definitely under pressure now. Looking at getting inventory closer to customer. How do you do that? How do you manage that? And obviously control kind of cost impacts across the business. So no shortage of kind of different challenges out there. That's for sure.
Yes, if there's one thing that's consistent, it's change and disruption. There was a question that's come in, which I'm going to actually hold on to until we get to the next section around technology. Was specifically just around the capabilities of SaaS offerings, which I think will be a native question for you, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Roy, I wonder if you could maybe share some of the insights you're seeing coming from your point of view. When there are a number of, human-driven or consumer-driven impacts that we've seen leading up to the pandemic, and then we had, a whole gamut of things that we hadn't anticipated and couldn't have necessarily planned for in various ways. What are some of the business impacts you've seen, and what sort of work have you been doing around your customer base and the industry as a whole to sort of help organizations get through those challenges and potentially lead them into the future?
Right. So, Des, I think first and foremost is, we know that businesses currently, as just been mentioned by Chris as well as by Travis, is that businesses are actually faced with recurring destructive events, right? They're either natural or they're man-made. It applies across Asia Pacific and even the global context. So I'm not just talking about the pandemic, right? I wish I didn't have to talk about that, but there are other things, right? Natural calamities that are coming through, supply shortages and so on and so forth, right? So that's a major issue that's actually driving, the evolution of business models now, especially from the e-commerce perspective, is that traditionally it's all brick and mortar or it's enterprise to enterprise, business to business. But right now with e-commerce on hand, right, you're going on to omni-channel fulfillment. So it's a combination. So we see all these things happening, and with the different restrictions that are happening, it's also impacting, I think, the cost to fulfill, right? Whether it's labor, resources, transportation assets, shortages of inventory or raw materials and what have you, right? All these actually requires visibility and real-time visibility, not historical visibility, because that doesn't work anymore. And everything is tied to the supply chain. That's what we see, right? Whether it's upstream or downstream flows, consisting of actual materials or financial flows, value-added services, information, and even risks, if you will, right? So everything's interconnected, right? There must be visibility down there, but it's easier said than done. We see this as a real challenge for customers, right? We've also observed that a lot of businesses, they hear about and they know about supply chain 4.0, industry 4.0. They want to know more about it. I mean, you can read about it, you can hear about it, or when you attend seminars. But they also want to know how this can be accomplished, right? But what kind of investment commitments, right, associated with this transformative processes are involved. Yeah. So and of course, they know that they need to digitize and to modernize, right? If they haven't, right? But again, this is something that they want to understand how best to proceed, the strategy behind it, the tactical initiatives, and this is where I think Zebra plays a very important role, because we're at the edge of the enterprise. We have the solutions that we can facilitate our customers to really start the digitization journey, right, through various initiatives. And then I'll leave the rest, for later.
Indeed, some great points there. It always, when I think about that point you made with regard to the previous, consideration around historical analytics and what we might have been able to learn, what happened in the past versus what we're doing now, where predictive analytics is really the real focus for us, and leveraging things like machine learning under the guise of sort of AI to figure out, well, if we know this, what could we estimate going forward, and getting some of those real-time insights. And I imagine we're going to start seeing a lot more people walking around with large tablet-sized devices in their hands with real-time dashboards, making decisions on the spot based on that data, rather than going back to pen and pad and stubby pencil and clipboards. Yeah. From a technology point of view, I wonder if we could maybe just shift our focus now. Chris, I wonder if I could bring you back in here, because you made a couple of key points I wanted to circle in on, particularly around distribution centers and some of the omni-channel and omni-retail challenges. What are you seeing as far as the technology challenges go to organizations? Some of the biggest shifts you've seen in the last 12 months in particular, but also some of the things that were leading up to that were already in play, that might have made it easier to get through the pandemic than anticipated. And where does that leave us going forward?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Des. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for us, actually. And I think we were kind of fortunate, because we started our journey in terms of our own technology transformation for Manhattan a number of years ago. And actually some of our key technology is now kind of built on native cloud architecture. And that platform has actually been kind of operating behind our omnichannel product for about the last 5 years, right? So it's actually enabled a lot of our customers to kind of get through, some of the key challenges, especially, through call it the pandemic period. Because that kind of technology allows these supply chain capabilities to automatically scale, right? So, we've had, customers who talk about, kind of handling with, kind of Black Friday volumes every day, without interruption, across the business. So, when you're thinking about, enabling that kind of capability across an extensive omni-channel network, which is looking at, call it what's happening in the DC and DC level inventory, full view of inventory out across your retail network, and supporting, call it that full customer interaction, be it either in store or online, and being able to make the right decisions about, availability, managing and minimizing, fulfillment costs, and driving and ensuring those high levels of customer service seamlessly, with potentially a scenario where overnight, you're facing a 10 times volume spike, has been an incredible capability. So, things that we're proud of, we've been able to support, kind of through that journey. We've also seen, some other stuff. So I know you alluded to that. So the omnichannel side, we kind of get with that platform, even on the DC side, and some things that are really starting to resonate at the moment. And going back to that kind of story of, the increased level of automation, Australia, again, as examples, we've kind of looking at that for a while, just on the back of obviously where our labor costs are going. And that whole kind of discussion about introduction of automation into the DC has made a lot more sense in recent years. Things like the mobile automation, I think, is making that discussion even simpler at the moment. But in the DC itself, it's changing the discussion. So, one of our core technologies around WMS has traditionally been focused on, call it, optimization of labor, right? The DC environment's much more complicated now because you've got all of this equipment in there. So the modern WMS is now much more focused on kind of that balance between man and machine. So how do we actually, kind of trade off, call it utilization of, call it the capital investment in the automation equipment, supported that and integrating, kind of the processes and material flows with the automation through that DC. So that kind of whole capability shift is kind of where we're seeing a lot more traction and the discussions we're having with our customers on the market now. And then, kind of that third thing on the technology side, so I know I spoke about, call it that what we call Manhattan Active is kind of our cloud native kind of platform. But that's now driving an additional set of discussions about faster access to capability. So internally, we kind of refer to that now as, because it's cloud native, it's versionless software, right? So be it either with what you've got in your omni-channel kind of supply chain suite, or within the DC, that traditional, access to new capability is linked to a 3 to 5 year upgrade cycle. Now we're releasing kind of new capability every 3 to 4 months, so that call it that time to market with new capability is just being seen as invaluable by our customer base.
Fantastic. We've actually had 3 questions that I'm going to summarize, and thank you everyone for putting the questions in. If you do have questions, pop them into the chat window. We'll do our best to integrate them into the panel discussion. Chris, just 30 more seconds with you if I can. There have been 3 questions specific to some of the challenges around data in the cloud and some of the data protection, cybersecurity risks of adopting SaaS. I wonder if you could just speak briefly to that and address some of those questions.
Yeah. I will always defer to the really technical people within our organization about that stuff. But from what we've seen, from what we deal with as a professional services consulting level, the requirements around, call it system security, data security, are getting tighter and tighter, right? And it's getting tougher to be able to satisfy those requirements with what we call more the legacy technology stack, right? So, in order to be able to, kind of even kind of engage in some of the conversations now, right? It's this call it the leading edge stuff about cloud native architecture, which is actually enabling, these call it more complex multi-enterprise supply chain, control systems to be able to operate in this new, kind of,
Indeed,
cloud native kind of environment, if that makes sense.
Yes, in fact, and just on that point briefly, I was at a conference recently, we won't name the brands, but public cloud providers, and the similar question came up, and the response that I'll sort of just quickly summarize in 30 seconds was that they had about 4,000 people focused on data protection, cybersecurity, and when they asked the person who asked a very good question, they had 1 person, and so I think it's a no-brainer that cloud platforms have enormous teams that are specialized resources to focus on this, where, if you're a bank or an airline or transport logistics company, cybersecurity isn't necessarily my core business, my strength, and I can sleep well at night knowing that's the case. There's also one quick question, which I'm going to answer very quickly myself, and the question was, when's the right time to consider software as a service cloud-based offerings? I think the very obvious answer to that is sooner than later. More importantly, I would say reach out to the folk on this event today and have a conversation with them sooner than later and get the conversation going. Don't wait, and also leverage their knowledge and experience and avoid any potential pitfalls you can. But thank you for the questions and keep them coming in the chat. Roy, I wonder if I can come back to you briefly. I mean, you talked about some of the technology challenges a little earlier from a business perspective, but when we look at it from a technology perspective at a different part of the organizations you're dealing with, at one point we're thinking about it from board level, now we're talking about sort of more technology and operations. There are a number of very nuanced challenges in the supply chain and fulfillment space. that you deal with, but then also a lot of them are traditional enterprise style technology challenges around where data is, how data is protected, where it's stored, some of the mobile devices, connectivity, VPN. I wonder if you can sort of talk about some of those challenges and how they're unique to, I guess, dealing with e-commerce and fulfillment in particular, and what your experience has been in the last year around that space with the technology focus.
Well, thanks. I think, as you mentioned, right, there are several technologies really available in the market. I mean, you're talking about AI, blockchain, and so on and so forth, right? If we actually narrow this down to the warehousing and distribution set of activities itself, I guess, there's already a variety of solution options, right? Because the way that Zebra actually works to support our customers is that we focus on the labor, the automation involved, and definitely the systems of records. In this case, if it's in a warehousing environment, it will be a WMS, right? So data is being generated, it's being captured, it's being analyzed, right, in as safe an environment as possible. And that's why we rely, on we work with partners, I would say, right, to ensure that the entire ecosystem is actually, well-grounded, if you will, right? But from the physical front, from the shop floor front itself, where we actually operate, you've got to look at, several factors, right? You've got to look at facilities, the size, the complexity of it, the workflows that are actually happening, what kind of labor, staffing structures in place. You got to look at, as I mentioned earlier on, you got to look at the IT solutions, whether they're siloed or they're actually, interconnected to some form of, in some way, right? What kind of functionalities are involved, and so on and so forth. You got to look at storage and a whole lot of solution variables, right? Because Zebra Technologies is, and I believe some of our partners, we're just part of the entire ecosystem, right? We function well or excellently, independently, but we work best actually when it's connected. So when these are some of the, I would say, the challenges when companies are actually exploring what to use, when to use, or what kind of benefits they actually have. So, it's always a case whereby, we need to really deep dive and see what's happening, right? And of course, whatever solutions are there, they have to come in with a very clear, I guess, neutral mindset, if you will, right? So any form of resistance or acceptance, or I'll call it compliance to some extent, would be either, deemed as positive or detrimental to actually the entire solution concept. If that makes sense to you guys.
Fantastic. Matthew, I've been dying to bring you in here, given the obvious technology focus around Rackspace and your role. I wonder if you could share some of the insights you've seen leading up to the end of 2019 and what the world looked like in what we might call a more normal environment, with some of the technology challenges that you were helping organizations with in their, firstly, transition to cloud, and also, I guess, leveraging technologies, whether it's infrastructure as a service or platform and software as a service from Rackspace and partners. Then the impacts that the pandemic brought about, and particularly, I guess, from scale, being able to either cloud burst or scale up and down infrastructure on demand to deal with the black swan event, as Travis alluded to earlier. What are some of the things you saw leading up to in a normal environment that organizations are working on, and from a technology perspective, and then how did 2020 impact, and what are some of the things we've learned from that might help us get beyond this?
Thanks, Des. So yeah, you're absolutely right. 2019, the digitization and mobile first was really the big thing. If you didn't have the device in your hand, you weren't being as efficient as you could be. And what really happened in 2020 was people really decided whether their BCP was actually relevant at all. And what happened pretty quickly on an almost global level was that they were very clear that the BCP was not fit for purpose in various different areas. So what we did see almost immediately was disruption in supply chain. Storage globally still has not recovered from that. There's a lack of storage on the market still today in the market. It's not helped by various trends like crypto that are consuming massive parts of technology for customers. But what it really identified was that scale that wasn't expected, that was in previous processes. So whether it was just the sheer volume of transactions, whether it was the lack of labor in various processes that was there, they just wasn't sufficient, forecast or planning done there. And if we look at traditional processes, they're normally reviewed maybe on a quarterly, maybe an annual basis. And what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic was brand new business cases that used to take maybe 6 to 9 months to get approved. And Travis spoke about this at the beginning. All of those got almost immediately approved. And then it was, okay, so we just skipped 3 months of planning. And so we really moved into this really agile methodology of really going through planning, execution, testing. And what that did was change, create a lot of change throughout the supply chain. And there were new bottlenecks that appeared and are still continuing to appear today. And actually getting visibility of what's going on both at the process level and at the infrastructure level is very difficult if you're using your traditional tools. So a lot of the challenges that we see customers coming to us with is they want to use this brand new business process, but they're really struggling to either maintain their existing processes, their existing data centers, but they still need to scale their business. This is where we're helping a lot of people both vertically scale their solutions, or we're helping them accelerate new solutions. If we look at the amount of choice that customers have as well, if we looked at just one part of the supply chain, you could come up with maybe 10 different vendors over 3 different platforms, over 5 different countries where they would operate and store their data. That's a massive amount of complexity that, to try and make a decision there, that requires that partnership that Royston talked about, of bringing the right partners together. But what we're seeing actually being really helpful is actually getting data, a modern data warehouse, actually that gives you a place that you can put all your data, and the public cloud is by far the best place suited for that, just in terms of its scale. And that data then can be given to all the different parts of the business, because, supply chain, has a lot of automation in it. Some of it may have manual components, but they're far more automated than other parts of the business. As soon as you get into the local store, some of these other areas, there's huge amounts of manual efforts there. And what we're seeing is people writing their own small apps and automation, either through partners or themselves, to actually fix some of these small manual processes that, due to COVID, they no longer could do themselves. You mentioned a coffee store at the beginning, but even simple HR tasks are even being automated, and actually understanding what the cybersecurity risks are of bringing all those solutions on. That will continue to be a horizontal play within the organization. And it's something that we're helping customers with, understanding the real risk, because sometimes it's overplayed. Sometimes there's a real understanding of what IP are you actually sharing with other partners or suppliers.
Fantastic. Yes, well, we all, we're all familiar with the emergence of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation with GDPR, and the impact that had on supply chain environments and all the underpinning technology. And certainly, as you alluded to there a moment ago, just the movement and flow of data and where workloads are. I don't necessarily know that organizations did a great job of preparing to deal with that. And then the pandemic came along and they had no choice. I totally agree with some of the impacts you highlighted there with regard to disaster recovery or DR plans and business continuity plans. What was interesting is on one particular day within the first couple of weeks of February, I was dragged from boardroom to the floor to operations to developers to the warehouse and the factory, and then out into vans going to retail centers. And we realized that none of the continuity plans were going to work, and they had to go back to how we're going to get through this. And it all just got thrown out the window, and I won't name who it was, but they did a very good job. But yeah, they realized that their continuity plan was predominantly business process and technology and data focused. And yet the number one thing they had to deal with was the impact of their humans. And so HR started running their business continuity as the first step. I'll come back to you in a second with a couple of questions. We've had 2 questions that are related to some of the space there with regard to the integration of on-premise and hosted / public cloud, and also some of the transition challenges, which I'll bring back in a moment with you, if you don't mind, in the next question with regard to operational focus and how we operationalize that. I'd like to shift our focus now to operational challenges. And Travis, if I could bring you back in here, you mentioned a couple of these things, and I thought maybe we'd get you just to touch back on them. You talked about some of the challenges around inventory, knowing where it was. I mean, there's some really big shifts we've seen with things like, I guess, the reverse of the supply chain model, reverse fulfillment, where it's all well and good to get it from a distribution center to some local site out to delivery into my house. But maybe it's not the product I wanted, or it's the wrong shape and size or whatever. And now I want to put it back into the network and return it. And do you get it back to the store and sell it, or is it damaged and has to be sent back? What are some of the things that you've seen from an operational point of view, Travis, that organizations may not have been as well prepared for, that you've been able to help them with and plan to get beyond not just the pandemic, but into the next sort of 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, definitely the operational challenges, much to what we were just talking about before, is around having the right inventory in the right location at the right time with the right channel to maximise your cost, to maximise your opportunity for sale, and also to minimise your cost of sale. So, a really big challenge for a lot of our customers and brands and retailers out there has really been around having a Me Too solution for the e-commerce scenario is extremely EBIT decretive in terms of their business. What they're seeing is, people, and I won't name names for clients, but people are buying the 400 rolls of toilet paper online, not the avocado and bananas online. So you've got a situation where, you've got a supply chain that is set up for store replenishment and store fulfillment, now being asked to do a lot of things that are way outside its design, and what typically is a 10-year program of development is now being fast-tracked into how quickly can we get our infrastructure right to be able to do this. And we're talking about fast decision-making and quick decision-making, but we are seeing, as part of that decision making at a board level, the agility being a key, or sensitivity analysis being a key driver for what happens if is a major question. And we're seeing things being fast tracked through, but intensive sessions with board members to get them passed through, because it's such an important step. We're also seeing, the digital world and the physical world really interacting far better than we ever did, in terms of, the importance on to have a great digital strategy means that you've got to have a really strong operational process in the back of house, and automation is a major part that fills that gap in terms of how that happens. And so the reasons that in Australia we were starting to go to automation was really around costs as a process, but we're now seeing automation being necessary in certain elements to be able to fulfill the orders and link it to the digital world to be able to make real-time decision-making on supply chain right the way from manufacturer to shelf. Interesting things in terms of operational challenges. We've just done multiple tenders for automations for major clients, and we're seeing this massive cost surge in automation globally. And we're seeing it mainly in the mobile automation, which everyone's trying to go to at this point. So you're seeing an increasing of cost, you're seeing a increasing of lead time, and also an availability problem worldwide with how we're going to get this stuff. And I'm sure Chris, Royston and Matthew can talk about the digital space also being under the same level of pressure worldwide to quickly ramp up with hardware and processes and how quickly you can get those things. But definitely in the automation space, there is a significant challenge. So people are trying to fast track the process, but having challenges with everyone's doing the same thing worldwide. And if Australia is 1% of sales for one of these automation people, it ain't coming quick to Australia. So definitely need to start planning ahead of the curve. We're seeing a multi-channel approach. So we talked earlier about retailers in the past have definitely in Australia tried to have a .com and a store network, but we've seen this massive rise of marketplace sales, B2B, e-commerce being a huge rising component, which is creating its own challenges across the journey. And then on top of that, we're also seeing social commerce also having a dramatic impact in Asia, people buying things off Instagram, expecting it today, tomorrow, the next day. One lesson learned that we did have along this journey is we had a view that the e-commerce orders had to happen really quickly, that it was about same day or next day delivery type components. And whilst that's still a value add, what's more important is understanding where the product is at any point in time and setting times and meeting those times. So customer expectations, whilst they've changed, it's more about accuracy than it is about absolute speed in certain channels. We've seen a rethinking of centralized fulfillment going to micro fulfillment as a solution, or having a multi-channel in micro and centralized fulfillment has been really interesting. What I do find interesting is that's at the retail end. We've seen that really big disruption at the retail end. I would say that the next level down, that are suppliers to retail, need to really think through more strongly what the future looks like, because I think they're still living in 2019 a little bit. And some of the thinking there is still around really lean operation, getting product through, how to get that. And the reality is the retailers will change because they're working on their strategies now. They will change how they want their product, when they want it, and the frequency and delivery. So I think we are seeing a lot of our suppliers now asking us what the retail end is doing so that they can design their supply chain to suit. So it is an interesting situation. And the buzzword at the moment, and it's definitely happening, is digitizing supply chain, right? So it's about real-time analytics, real-time data influencing decision-making in the S&OP, demand planning, the process, inventory locations, inventory planning. What used to be the boring part of supply chain, if you like, being the S&OP component of any of the operators that you talk to, that was the boring part, and the transformation, the big sexy automation was what people were trying to get into. We've seen that really shift. And significantly shift. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, just mindful of time, we're about 7 or 8 minutes away from wrapping up the hour. So I wonder, Royston, if I can bring you back in, just if you were to take just a couple of minutes now briefly to summarize some of the key points you're seeing around operational challenges. I imagine you've seen some direct impact in what you're doing, working with organizations around labor, around retraining, some of the issues around inventory and asset optimization. In a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, how would you sort of summarize in bullet point form some of the immediate operational impacts you're seeing?
I guess, thanks, Les. I think, as what was just echoed by Travis, right? Okay, it's the cost to fulfill, right? It's visibility, right? In what we've observed across Asia Pacific, even in Australia itself, is that labor is a challenge, right? Qualified labor that is okay. So it's always a challenge to actually really just to source, to train, and to retain them. So what things have to be done, right, to ensure that the productivity levels are raised to acceptable standards. That's the first thing. Second is in terms of inventory and asset optimization. Now we've got inventory. Obviously, we've got inventory optimization through planning. I think Travis just talked about S&OP. The not so sexy part of it, and there's also the asset optimization portion, whereas if you deploy assets, material handling equipment, whatnot, within the four walls itself, how do you know how well they are performing, right? So there needs to be visibility to this, and all this is basically, it's to ensure that the operating costs, right, are kept optimal, right, so that you can actually with or without automation. But as I think what Travis has just mentioned itself, automation is something that will not go away. It's going to be the next big thing. It's just that in select parts of the world, it's taking more time to actually for adoption. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, we're seeing a real emergence of robotic process automation, or RPA, across organizations. Yeah. I think certainly supply chain and e-commerce are rife for some real improvements there. Matthew, similarly, sorry to keep you short, but just mindful of time. We're about 5 minutes out from the hour. If you were going to summarize in a couple of minutes some of the key points you're seeing that organizations should need to be thinking about from an operational point of view, what might they look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So what was really interesting with all these new projects being approved in 2020, there was this increase in OPEX, where traditionally it had been a very heavy CapEx part of the business, 3 to 5 year cycles, a lot of planning. So actually getting procurement to actually being able to change their models, and actually other parts of finance to actually be able to go and actually move to maybe a subscription model for buying, a new piece of software. What we also saw is this continued demand of transformation in IT, in the IT team itself. For many years, IT has been no, IT has been cannot, try to do something with what you've got. What we've seen there is the business units really taking control and saying, look, this is, the CEO and the CFO are now saying, this is what needs to be done. And what we're seeing for customers that are being successful, obviously the barriers are coming down, but what we're seeing is teams of both product owners and IT owners operating with a lot more freedom than previously. The biggest element of that is the behavior change. There's nothing really there that's dramatically different. There is a little bit of training that has to be done, obviously, of new technologies if they're completely brand new to them. And then actually changing the KPIs of those teams so they understand what is massively critical for them to achieve some of these really big, transformations. When you've got you're very inward focused, you also need to be outward focused about your suppliers, all these other items. And are these the right suppliers that are modernizing at the same rate as you? So we talked about ASEAN, about how, they have skipped banking. They don't accept payment through credit card. They don't accept payment through all these different things. Are your existing partners throughout the supply chain going to modernize at the same rate that you need to? And then finally, cybersecurity regulations and privacy regulations per country. These are going to affect e-commerce. That could be just a whole other webinar just on that topic. But with e-commerce, it does give you this idea that it should be easier to go global, or at least across APJ. There is a lot of challenges there that the local governments are adding very quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot to be taken into that, and I'm sure we could have a whole hour discussion on that. Chris, similarly, if you're going to wrap up just in a quick 2-minute summary, if you don't mind, of some of the key bullet points you've seen that organizations need to be thinking about from an operational point of view, that they can potentially reach out to yourselves and the team to have a conversation with. What should they be thinking about actioning in the immediate future?
Yeah, I'll keep it really quick. I think the key message here is you probably need to act fast here. Obviously the impacts that we faced through pandemic and how the supply chains have needed to restructure is changing the market now. We're starting to see a lot of, because of the uplift in volume, the potential for transformation of e-commerce and digital supply chain that starts to bring this part of the world up to where the rest of the world's been operating for some time. We're starting to see a lot more pressure coming on in things like marketplace and endless aisle. I think we're going to see a lot more consolidation in the market. So the landscape is shifting, right? I think it's going to be those companies who understand what that new customer experience needs to be and who are going to be able to manage it are going to be the ones who are going to come out on the other side of this, the winners, right? So you've got a lot of experience and people like sitting around on this panel, the vendors and the consultants. Open up the conversation. Bring us in. Let's be part of the discussion to help you develop a solution and call on that global experience.
Fantastic, indeed. No, I think that right there is the best advice that anyone can be given in this space around the challenges and the facing change of e-commerce. Is start those conversations now, sooner than later. Well, Roy, Chris, Travis, Matthew, we've had a really great conversation for the last hour or so. We're coming up to the hour, so I wonder if we can switch to some of the questions that have come in. We've got a lot of them. We've got dozens and dozens, actually, so we're going to capture those and respond to most of those in follow-up emails. But I wonder if I could just give each of you one sort of speed dating takeaway that you may be able to answer in a bullet point format. There's been a question, Travis, let me just bring you in here. There's been a question around any advice you can offer with regard to how to approach some of the physical infrastructure and fulfillment challenges that organizations are going to face as they either refit or roll out new infrastructure. Speed dating format, if you could, maybe just some advice to that you've seen from your own experience that organizations might be able to consider and take away in action with regard to how to approach some of the physical infrastructure and fulfillment environmental changes they need to put in place.
Yeah, definitely a very speed dating process. Definitely need to simulate their supply chain and look at the sensitivity analysis and work on the network planning type component prior to just going and implementing. Too many people have in the last 12 months just flown out the door, gone and got space, tried to fit it out. It's now becoming a thorn to their side. So really need to think short, medium, long on the process and step through it with someone that can do network planning appropriately, correctly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Roy, there's been a number of questions we're going to paraphrase into a couple of key points, and maybe I can probably answer it in some way, and we should be reach out yourselves and have a quick conversation to get that work underway. Sure. But the questions are essentially around some of the key steps that and advice you can maybe offer on how to approach the transition to an e-commerce warehousing solution, how to transform that warehouse management platform and get to sort of future-proofing in speed dating format. I wonder if you could just give us a couple of key points that people can take away in action as to how you recommend they approach that whole transition.
Sure. Well, the good news is Zebra has a warehouse maturity model. Basically, it's a 5-phase structured approach. That's how we can actually guide our customers how to transform based on what they believe their current mid and long-term objectives are. So it's all about looking at the labor aspect. Right, labor is not going to go away; it's still going to be there. We'll look at automation because it's going to be a joint equation. The third is actually the workflow processes that involve how to optimize them based on whatever charter that they have in place. So that's a speed dating plan. For more information, we'll talk offline.
Yes, please do reach out to you soon. Matthew, there's been half a dozen questions just specifically around the hybrid challenge. I'm going to paraphrase them. If you were to offer some advice, Matthew, around how organizations, and particularly, I guess, working with yourselves at Rackspace, how they should best approach the challenge of getting started with the challenge of dealing with on-premises, third-party hosted in data centers and cloud environments and hybrid. Again, just very, very briefly in bullet point form, if you don't mind, what are some of the things they should be considering and how should they approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So visibility will continue to be the biggest challenge, not only just at the process level, but as you have more and more environments that are running in different platforms, they may be in your partner's data center, they may be in your data center, they may be in the public cloud. Getting visibility and understanding of what is actually going on in that environment is by far the biggest challenge. And actually detecting and being able to respond to if there's either scaling or performance events or cybersecurity events. So these are, that's the easiest way to stop a supply chain event, actually. And some parts of it are can be incredibly fragile. So yeah, detection Fantastic. Of security incidents.
Indeed, yeah, that can be one of the top 3 things you'll be worrying about is not just your data, but the protection of it. Thank you very much. And obviously reach out to yourself and your team at Rackspace to get that conversation going sooner or later. Chris, lucky but last. Wonder if you could maybe paraphrase a couple of these. So we've had a whole bunch of questions around the challenge to rationalize current infrastructure, how to stay on top of some of the emerging trends. I wonder if you could leave us with a closing point of advice on how organizations should, I guess, prioritize some of those challenges around emerging trends and where do they start?
Yeah, let me just focus on one kind of key concept, I think. And I think it ties together a whole bunch of the things that companies need to be looking at. But there's an increasing level of complexity that's coming up around the coordination control across a much more complex, call it omni-channel physical network. Be that DC, be that store, be that kind of remote inventory outpost supporting a hyperlocal capability. That's all required, call it infrastructure that needs to be in place to enable a consistent customer experience. Be it online, in store, any way your customers are going to engage with your business. So how do you get that level of control? How do you get that level of consistency and service level to give a consistent message and get that level of coordination across a much more complex environment? Technology sits behind all of that. Yeah, and we're happy to have some interesting conversations with anybody who wants to talk a little bit more.
Indeed, and leverage your professional services capabilities from day one. Well, we've run a couple of minutes over the hour. Thank you everyone for staying with us. We really appreciate all the time our attendees have invested in joining us today, being part of the conversation. Thank you for all the amazing questions. We apologize that we ran out of time to get to all, and we will respond from the team via email. Travis, Chris, Roy, Matthew, thank you so much for making yourselves available for this great conversation. Really been fantastic to get some insights from each of you around the business, technology, and operational challenges we've had. And to Supply Chain Insights, thank you so much for making this possible. It's been a great conversation around the changing face of e-commerce. We really appreciate you making time to join us. We hope you will see you in the next event. And I'm Des Blanchfield. Have a great day. Stay safe and join the conversation online. Follow all of the folk from TMX, Manhattan, Zebra, Rackspace on Twitter and LinkedIn, and reach out to them directly and have a conversation today rather than sooner than later, and see if you can avoid some of those pitfalls. Again, thank you, Travis, Chris, Roy, Matthew, and hopefully we'll see you again soon in another event.